Okay, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on the role of supplier ESG scoring in building sustainable supply chain. We are excited to have you with us to explore how ESG transparency, supplier engagement, and data-driven scoring are transforming global value chain. So I will start with introducing our speakers today. So we have Azli. Azli is a lawyer and GRI certified ESG manager at Innova Beyond. Her work sits at the intersection of ESG compliance, risk, and transformation. Today, she will be talking about the importance of ESG in the global supply chain. Also, we have Marina. She is Senior Business Development Consultant for Synergy. She is supporting several CRIF market in the strategic positioning and monitoring of Synergy. Synergy is our global digital platform for ESG assessment. She will be talking about the ESG assessment journey. And I'm Michael. I'm Consultant Research and Advisory Services at CRIF and responsible for Synergy across GCC region. I'll be co-presenting today's session and contributing from the perspective of ESG supplier assessment and regional market insights. Please note that this webinar is recorded, and please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A section, and we will address all the questions after the presentation. So, Azli, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. We're happy that we're here with you today. So basically, I would like to introduce today and talk about the importance of Scope 3 emissions and also ESG performance in the value chain. But before, thank you for introducing me, Michael. A few words about me. I'm a lawyer and I'm a sustainability expert. And in general, I am guiding organizations through ESG risks, compliance, and transformation. I help them to write sustainability reports. I help them to create strategies, not only focusing on their operations, but also their supply chain. Why? Because over the past few years, we see that ESG has fundamentally changed in both scope and ambition. And what we are seeing globally today is a shift away from focusing only on what happens within the company boundaries towards a much deeper scrutiny over value chains. That is mainly the reason why I believe what we are talking about today is highly crucial for each single organization, regardless of its location, size, or sector. So it's important for you as well. So let me go through the agenda of the part that I will be covering today. We will first explore what matters today in the ESG space and why supply chains have become such a focal point globally. We will then look at the increasing regulatory pressure, and I will introduce the concept of double materiality. Which is now shaping the ESG decision-making worldwide and putting, again, the supply chain focus at the very center. Finally, we will also look at where value chain risks and impacts typically sit and how organizations can move from assessment to meaningful supplier engagement. And then I will leave the stage to Marina. So let's start. Before going deeper into some methodologies and data, I find it quite useful to step back and look at why ESG sustainability matters really so much today. Why also the supply chain is at the center of this conversation. First, global supply chains are really becoming more complex, really more fragmented, and more exposed to disruption. In this context, supplier engagement is no longer just a sustainability topic. It's becoming a key driver of operational efficiency and resilience. That is so because companies really that understand and work closely with their suppliers, we see that they're better equipped to manage risk and uncertainty. But it is not that common. What we see is that most companies don't know their supply chain partners, actually. But we're going to talk about it later. Then we see that ESG performance is becoming a matter of credibility. Customers, regulators, investors, and partners increasingly expect companies to demonstrate real action, not just commitments. And much of that evidence sits in the supply chain again. This is especially true for climate, greenhouse gas emissions, especially Scope 3 emissions, which is almost becoming a buzzword. It's really popular. Scope 3 emissions often represent the largest share of a company's greenhouse gas footprint, carbon footprint, but they cannot be measured or managed without reliable supplier data. And without supplier engagement, without knowing the suppliers, managing them, emission strategies remain incomplete. There's also a growing expectation that companies reduce negative environmental and social impacts while enhancing the positive outcomes across their supply chain. This makes, again, ESG not only about risk, but also about opportunities, about value creation and long-term competitiveness. And finally, regulatory pressure, which is actually my bread and butter, like coming from a legal background, focusing on compliance. I know that regulatory pressure is increasing globally, including in this region. Companies that build ESG and supply chain capabilities early are going to be better positioned to adapt and avoid costly last-minute compliance and remain future ready. So overall, ESG today is no longer about just ticking the boxes, but it is about understanding where the risk, impact, and value really sits in the complex supply chains, and like how we can manage these complex supply chains better, engaging with the suppliers. So let me start illustrating this rapid expansion of supply chain due diligence and regulations around the value chain mapping. Like we have seen a lot of laws coming from the EU, as you see here, but also Canada, United States, Japan, Australia. We have in EU, in the European Union, we have a EU Green Deal that is that fuels a lot of laws being enacted, like Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, and now, even more recently, the EU Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism regulation, which is a carbon tariff on carbon-intensive products, such as steel, cement, that is imported to the European Union. This obviously raises expectations and is going to affect many non-EU companies through their imports, contracts, and financing. But I know that now we have the participants from the Gulf companies in the Middle East. And I know that you're looking at this map and saying, okay, why do I actually care about this map right now? Because at this first glance, I know that it appears to reflect the laws that apply mainly to Europe, but also North America, parts of Asia. But the Middle Eastern companies, if they assume that it is not directly relevant to them, it's a big mistake. Because in reality, this map is highly relevant, not because these laws apply territorially in also the Middle East, but because they increasingly shape the expectations placed on the Middle Eastern companies through the global value chains. The relevance lies in some, like, let's say, three main pillars. First, indirect exposure, then commercial pressure, and future regulatory alignment. When I'm talking about the indirect legal exposure, for example, imagine a UAE-based real estate developer, a construction company, or a manufacturer who supplies goods or services to an EU-based company, or who participate in projects financed by European banks, or even export materials, components, or services into these regulated markets. Under the laws that we just see here, these companies are going to be asked to complete ESG questionnaires showing that they're compliant with these laws. They're going to be subject to supplier audits. They're going to be required to provide human rights and environmental data across the supply chains, and also expected to demonstrate some corrective actions, not just written policies. Then we have the commercial and contractual relevance, which means these laws are increasingly translated into contractual obligations. In practice, it looks like the Middle Eastern companies seeing more ESG clauses in their supplier contracts, mandatory human rights representations needed, requirements to disclose subcontractors and even their labor practices, and some termination rights linked to ESG non-compliance. Then we said the third pillar is investor and financing pressure. We know that EU banks and or for example, if you are getting funding from any other regulated jurisdiction, the banks and institutional investors are going to apply the ESG due diligence aligned with EU and other international standards. Then the GCC companies are going to be seeking international financing, green or sustainability linked loans, partnership with global investors. They're going to see that their ESG performance are going to become a big opportunity, not just a reputational issue. Then, of course, while the GCC does not yet have a standalone supply chain due diligence law equivalent to these jurisdictions, the regulatory direction is in fact clear, because here in the UAE, for example, we have the federal decree number 11 that is becoming a reality. We have the long-term commitments in the region, such as net zero 2050. So there are some expectations from the GCC companies to prevent forced labor and labor exploitation, ensure responsible employment, implement due diligence and risk assessment mechanisms, again, not just policies. So this is not possible without understanding the supply chain. What does it mean? It means waiting for any supply chain regulation with this specific name to become your reality is really risky. I know this from most of my clients, that a common misconception is that they can wait until there's a local law fully mirror these due diligence regimes. But in practice, this creates risks, as we mentioned. So the key message, without making it too long, that I want to land in this presentation, like in this slide, is if you're a Middle Eastern company, the supply chain due diligence laws do matter, not because they're copied locally overnight, they're going to be copied locally overnight, but because they define the rules of engagement in the value chains today. So I also want to talk about the concept of double materiality, which is quite linked to supply chains. Double materiality means companies looking at their sustainability related issues from two directions at the same time. First, we have impact materiality and financial materiality. And we are going to look at the effects of my business on the environment and people, and risks and opportunities on the business. We are going to look at environment and people, the business value. And as you see, this is a double materiality assessment illustration that I took directly. I created it with one of our clients that's called NICE. You can check the sustainability report online. As you see, all the impacts, risks and opportunities are mapped across the supply chain. How are we going to do it if we don't have full visibility over the supply chain? It is going to be very difficult. And double materiality is important because when companies fail to engage with their suppliers, they are not going to just fail a compliance exercise, but they are going to fail to understand where their real impacts and business risks actually sit. Most companies think that business risks, impacts are just a result of their own operations. But as you see from this map, which is the result of extensive stakeholder engagement activities, the positive and negative impacts, risks and opportunities are not only focused on own operations, but also upstream and downstream. For the majority of organizations, value chain impacts do represent the biggest ESG blind spot. As I mentioned before, this challenge becomes even more visible when we talk about scope 3 emissions. When we say scope 3, as you see here, we are including all the indirect emissions that occur along the value chain, both upstream and value chain and downstream value chain. And we know that even if an organization is not disclosing the full report, it is disclosing the greenhouse gas emissions, because there are a lot of laws that are requiring this. Even to have the competitive advantage, they're disclosing it. But when it comes to scope 3, it is really representing the largest share of total emissions often by far. And yet it is the area where companies struggle the most. Why? Because these emissions cannot be measured from inside the company alone. They depend entirely on the understanding what happens outside the organizational boundary. Who are the suppliers? Which processes are energy intensive? Where are the biggest emission hotspots? Which suppliers are critical versus replaceable? Without the visibility over the supply chain, the data collection becomes a guessing exercise. And of course, it's not accurate when you guess so much. So companies rely on industry averages, proxies, and assumptions heavily. They may satisfy the reporting requirements in the short term, but they're not going to support decision making. They're not going to create any value, and it is going to remain a budget intensive exercise more than value creation exercise. So on this slide, I don't want to focus a lot on the numbers of statistics themselves because Marina is going to go much deeper into that after me. But what I want to show you is that why awareness of risk is only the starting point, because identifying the impacts and risks creates an expectation to act. And once a company knows where its material ESG risks lie, especially again in the value chain, doing nothing is no longer a neutral choice. This is where supplier ESG engagement becomes critical. When done properly, we know that supplier ESG engagement shifts away from a compliance-driven exercise and becomes a risk mitigation and opportunity mechanism. It's going to help the company to improve resilience, support better data collection, especially for greenhouse gas emissions scope 3 part, and it often also leads to operational efficiencies and innovation. In a context where global supply chains are now becoming increasingly complex and fragile, open to disruption risks, companies that do not engage with their critical suppliers, and let me underline the fact that most of the companies do not even know their critical suppliers, they are exposing themselves to serious risks. Regulatory non-compliance, supplier disruptions, reputational damage, and loss of competitiveness is some of them. So if the companies that invest in understanding and engaging their supply chains, they are putting attention on the managing, engaging with their supply chain partners, they are going to be far better positioned to mitigate the risks, capture opportunities, and build long-term value. And this is really the core message of the part that I'm covering here. In today's environment, the supply chain ESG engagement is really not optional. It is part of the enterprise risk management process. It is not only related to sustainability, it is enterprise risk management. So I would like to close with a few key takeaways, and then I will leave the stage to Marina, who will walk us through the ESG assessment journey for supply chains. First, we said that regulatory pressure is accelerating globally. We are seeing a rapid expansion of supply chain, human rights, and ESG-related requirements across the globe, mostly Europe, North America, and Asia. But we said that it's not just about compliance, and there are a lot of, let's say, cascading impacts on the suppliers, on the companies that are all around the globe. Also, this includes Middle East. Early ESG and supply chain risk management helps the organizations to avoid last-minute compliance costs, operational disruptions, and reputational damage. Companies that wait, as we see, that are often forced into reactive and really expensive solutions. They lose a lot of time, they lose a lot of money. Then we said double materiality is now central to ESG decision-making. Organizations are expected to assess both how their activities impact people and environment, the inside-out perspective we talked about, and how ESG risks and opportunities affect the business itself. So when it comes to double materiality, value chain, without understanding the value chain, we can't do a reliable materiality assessment. Supply chains sit at the center of this analysis because they drive both impact and financial exposure. Then we said there's a strong focus on supply chain performance because value chain impacts represent the largest ESG risk and opportunity area for most organizations. That is the reason why supplier engagement today is not optional. It is foundational. And without active engagement with the suppliers, organizations really cannot access the data needed for robust impact assessments, sustainable to report, effective risk mitigation, identifying the opportunities, and like even policies alone, they're no longer sufficient. Engagement with suppliers is what turns commitments, policy commitments, strategy commitments into action. Then we said Scope 3 emissions are also a strategic priority, not just a reporting exercise. Granularly, reliable supplier data is essential for credible Scope 3 emission measurement and management. Okay. Then we said engage suppliers, enable better performance and resilience across the supply chain. Organizations today that work proactively with suppliers are better positioned to manage disruption, improve efficiency, and adapt to changing regulatory and market expectations. Finally, like our aim shouldn't be reporting exercise or compliance. It should be strong resilience, reputation, driven by strong ESG performance. That cannot be done, again, managing the entire value chain. So this concludes my part of the presentation. And Marina now is going to take the lead and talk about more the supply chain risks across the globe. Thank you very much. I leave the stage to you, Marina.
Thank you, Azli. Good morning, everyone. Just a second, let me show my presentation. Can you see it? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. In my presentation, I will walk you through the ESG assessment and through the ESG assessment journey and why it matters. I will also talk to you about the main risks and challenges and how companies can adopt a structured and automated approach to assess their supply chain, to comply with regulations and to build a more resilient and sustainable supply chain. So to understand the ESG assessment of the supply chains, let's recap what a sustainable supply chain really is. So a sustainable supply chain applies responsible practices at every stage of its operations, not only inside its own operations, but also across its suppliers and partners. This includes, of course, a robust environment, social governance, and industry practices. So essentially, we can say if sustainability isn't embedded into your value chain, you will never know what the risks and negative impacts are for your company. And these impacts, I assure you, are much larger than many companies expect. So research shows that around 70% of ESG risks resides in the supply chain. Around 90% of natural capital impact, for example, pressure on air, soil, land, also lies in the supply chain. And around 80%, just think about it, of greenhouse gas emissions also happens in the supply chain. And this is why Scope 3 reporting has become so important for many companies. So in 2026, we already know that the main risks of sustainability do not lie inside the corporate walls. They basically are concentrated in the supply chains. And you should always remember that your supplier, every warehouse, every shipment creates for you both value and risks. Here you can see what can be a major environmental impact in some industries. Let's look at the left. Here we have a utilities company, and we can all see that because of the nature of this company, the majority of its environmental risks lies inside of its operations. But if we look on the right, and these are the majority of all industries, take, for example, technology, telecommunications, retail, even automotive, financial services, and banking, and many, many others, we can see that more than 90% of the risks lies outside direct control of the company. So it lies in the supply chain. And what are these risks that we are talking about? Mainly, if we're talking about ESG risks, we're talking about environment, social, and governance risks. For example, if we're talking about environmental risks, we can talk about risk of increasing GHG emissions for the company. Let's take one very, very good supplier with whom you are working. But if this supplier uses outdated diesel generators, this supplier not only increases his own scope, his own GHG emissions, but he is also increasing scope 3 emissions for you as his client. We can talk about also biodiversity loss. For example, you have also another supplier who works in another country, but he wants to expand his own operations, and he's just cutting forests, for example. By this, he is creating a biodiversity loss risk, not only for himself, but also for you. Let's not talk about non-compliance with regulatory requirements. And in this case, not only he may be fined for these activities, but also you. When we're talking about social risks, we of course are talking about human rights violations, child labor risks, gender gap risks, and many, many others. Let's recall an example of a very famous Italian luxury brand, Loro Piana, who just last year was accused of worker abuses in its supply chain. So even if the company stated that it was not aware of subcontracting practices in its supply chain, however, it was put under court monitoring for a year. And when we are talking about governance risk, we are of course talking about lack of transparency, risk of data privacy, and bribery practices and corruption. So when we're talking about ESG supply chain assessment process, we mainly divide it into 6 steps. The first step is to map and prioritize your supply chain. So here you have to have a full look on your supply network, and you have to identify which suppliers play the biggest role in your operations and where the highest risks and impacts might be. For example, you may have hundreds of suppliers, but after an analysis, you can see that 70% of your spending is concentrated in just 10 suppliers. Moreover, you can discover that 5 of these suppliers are irreplaceable because of their highly specialization. So you have to understand if these suppliers, for example, are not into sustainability and ESG practices, how you can collaborate with them to improve their ESG performance. The next step is to identify material ESG topics. So here you have to determine which environmental, social, and governance issues matter most. Here, the goal is just to focus on what truly drives risk and value. For example, if you are an electronics manufacturer, for you, for example, material ESG topics will be, of course, responsible mineral sourcing, worker safety, chemical management, and energy use. If you're an agricultural company, for your material ESG topics will be probably different, and they will refer to labor rights, land use, and water use. Then you will proceed with step 3, which is define clear ESG goals and standards. So basically here you will have to understand to which ESG and sustainability regulations your company has or doesn't have to comply with by law. And you may also decide if, for example, you want to do sustainability reporting, to which framework you want to use. For example, you may want to use global standards of GRI. And also here you should set clear ESG goals. For example, in a 5-year period, I want to decrease my scope 3 emissions by 20%. And here we come to step 4, engage and collaborate with your suppliers. So once you have defined clear ESG goals, you also have to communicate them and to your suppliers. Here, it's more about communication and partnerships. So you should explain to them your ESG expectation and help them also understand the whole process, and maybe organize workshops, give them any templates or tools with the help of which they may also help you with your ESG goals. Step 5 is more about conducting ESG assessment of supplies. Here, usually it's about using ESG platform that provides you with an automated process and provides you for comparable results. It may also be an audit of supplies or third-party assessments. And step 6 is monitoring and reporting progress. Of course, this process is not without challenges, and there are a lot. For example, one of the most biggest ones is limited knowledge about ESG and capacity. So we see that many, especially small and medium suppliers, lack of awareness of what is ESG and sustainability. They maybe never had training on these topics. They don't have a dedicated staff or internal systems to track ESG metrics. Another problem is absence of reliable ESG data. So many suppliers don't systematically track ESG data, even if we on practice see that many of them already do something in terms of ESG, but maybe they don't even know that they are doing this. But however, they don't have any structured process on a regular basis. Another problem for big companies, for big international companies, may be global supply chains. So here we're talking about country and region specificities, different practices, and of course, different ESG and sustainability requirements. A level of maturity of supplies. So some supplies are already advanced in terms of ESG and sustainability. Others may have a low readiness. For example, we have a big Italian client, and this client has integrated ESG assessment into its procurement processes. Once its suppliers complete the ESG assessment, this client looks at their ESG score, and it provides its suppliers with two options. So if you have a low level of sustainability, we can work together on your growth in terms of ESG and sustainability. And if you already have an advanced score, like excellent or very good score on sustainability, we can work on innovation processes. Another problem is, of course, constituted by monitoring and benchmarking. So if the process of ESG assessment of your supply chain is not a structured process, it may be a big problem for you, because it becomes very slow and resource intensive. And here we come to the fact that basically, in this process, consistent, comparable, and verifiable ESG data is key. So if you haven't structured the process of ESG assessment of your supply chain, you will face from your suppliers different documents in different formats without uniform indicators and metrics. And for you, it will be super difficult to evaluate your supplies fairly, and it will be really subject to interpretation. You won't also be able to identify the gaps and maturity of your suppliers. And here we come to a typical automated ESG assessment process that many big companies already use to assess their supply chains, and it's very linear and very simple. Usually it is initiated by the buyer, the head of supply chain, who invites its suppliers to register on an ESG platform. Once its suppliers have registered on the platform, they will get access to their questionnaire that usually is divided into 3 parts. The part for environmental questions, for social questions, and for governance questions. And what the suppliers have to do? The suppliers have to insert their normal business data, but what the platform helps to do is to transform this business data into ESG data by posing some specific questions and by doing some specific calculations, like helping you to calculate GHG emissions. And also, usually the suppliers are asked to provide some supporting documentation, which may be energy bills or, for example, your sustainability reporting. After they submit the questionnaire, there is usually a process of data quality check, and the ESG score is then given to the company. For example, on our Synergy platform, the scoring is very simple. It ranges from A being the excellent score to E being the low score for sustainability. Moreover, the company receives a certificate that it can usually use not only with this specific buyer, but for example, if it also participates in any tender where ESG certification is required, or maybe it wants to share its commitment to sustainability with other stakeholders, and usually it can do so. So the benefits of this process are various, and they are both for the supplier and for buyer. So for the head of supply chain, of course, it is a better risk management because it can identify hidden environmental ESG risks that otherwise could disrupt its operations. For both companies, it's improved compliance and enhanced transparency. So it means that the companies are usually more able to make better strategic and operational decisions. It's improved reporting because the head of supply chain can gather more data on the sustainability of its supply chain that it can put then in sustainability reporting. It's an access to capital and stronger supplier engagement. Last but not least, we know that ESG in general, ESG practices require, especially at the first stages, solid investment, but in the long run, we can see that at the end, they bring to operational efficiency and cost savings. I also wanted to show you two slides that I extrapolated from our ESG observatory, which is based on all ESG data that we have in our system, in our Synergy platform that does the ESG assessment of companies, and that we have combined also with our business information and proprietary analytics data. So here I wanted to show you that we have found out that companies that do the ESG certification are generally 50% less commercially risky compared to companies that don't do such a certificate. And here we basically can come to two conclusions: that in generally less risky companies are more open and transparent and also more keen to do ESG assessment, but also companies that do their ESG assessment are generally less risky. And another one, we have found out that companies that do more than 2 ESG assessments tend to improve their ESG performance over time. So this brings us to another conclusion, that sustainability can't be seen just as a one shot. It is a strategic vision that has to be embedded in your business model whenever you are a supplier or a buyer. Thank you very much for attention. I hand over to Michael.
Thank you, Marina. I'll share my presentation. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, so I will be speaking or connecting the dots between what Azli mentioned and Marina mentioned in our vision. So I will start with stressing on the points that they have mentioned, that the majority of the risk is in the supply chain, because you have a visibility and monitoring over your internal operations. However, it's not the case in the supply chain. Unless you can know what is happening exactly in the supply chain, you can control your emissions, but you cannot control the emissions of your suppliers unless you have a visibility over the emission production. So the most of disruption happened in the supply chain, not internally. And having supply sustainability, it's directly impacting your business continuity or like cost stability or corporate repetition. So just to give you an example of corporate repetition, so if you're a company and dealing with a supplier who has been accused with low labor or poor labor environment or child labor, this directly affects your operations and even may affect your revenues, because customers now are getting more educated and they look for more sustainable and ESG-friendly companies. So how ESG score builds sustainable supply chain? So first, you will need to identify the risk. As mentioned, most of the risk and most of the emissions are lying in the supply chain. So by having a better visibility over your supply chain, you'll be able to identify the risk early. You will be able to engage and not replace. So engage means that no one wants to lose his suppliers. So currently what happens is in this phase, since there is no strict mandates in our region as of yet, so you still have the luxury of improving your practices and your supplier practices as well. So by understanding their position, you can work together towards more sustainable actions. So, and that lead to the next step, which is support long-term supplier improvement. Again, because as mentioned, it's not like a tick box that you're covering. It's not like a compliance checkbox that you're covering now. However, it's a long-term journey. So you will keep on working on this, you and your suppliers, because again, even the laws and regulations are getting stricter. So they are applied to do a positive domino effect. So it is coming up, down to the supply chain. So that will lead to comparing the supplier consistently. So that means that you will need to have ongoing visibility over your suppliers, and you will be able to identify what KPIs exactly should be applied in the supply chain. To give you more understanding or like more practical practices that is being done by our customers. So there is a lot of customers now in the GCC area are like onboarding, when they are onboarding new suppliers, it's a mandatory to have an ESG assessment. Like also in the RFP or RFQ, it's one of the main clauses now is the ESG scoring, because they need to mitigate the supplier risk to minimize any interruption that might happen to the project for which they are raising the RFP. Some companies even they take their decision based on the high ESG score if it's like big ticket size now. So in order to take the projects or like to bid for like big projects, maybe your ESG scoring would be one of the main criteria to identify or win or lose the business. Again, more of the practices that is happening now, companies are adding a clause related to ESG KPI in their contract to ensure that the duration of the contract will have a written clause that will make the supplier abide to all the KPIs and ESG performances and regulations. Also, like some companies are not even checking only their direct supply chain, but they check the supply chain of their suppliers. To give you an example of this, imagine a real estate developers, for example. So the direct suppliers will be contractors. So those contractors will have sub-suppliers where they supply the materials. So there is more risk actually lie in the subcontractors or the suppliers of their direct suppliers. So this is why some companies even go to a further step of taking the assessment of the supplier of their suppliers to ensure the continuity and there is no risk that would be lying in the near future for their business. This is like a snapshot that I took from Google. Just I mentioned which companies in the UAE mandate ESG assessment on suppliers, just to give you a quick view that it is already happening and embedded in a lot of practices in our region. So by typing that simple question, it shows how many companies they mandate the ESG assessment of their suppliers. And that shows you how important is assessing the supply chain for you and for your business and for the competitiveness and risk mitigation, even in our region where we don't have as much as strict regulations as Europe. Another example that I took from EAND, so in their website, one of the goals that they have is by 2030, they will reduce 25% of their scope 3 emissions. So that means that they have to have the assessment, the visibility over their suppliers. They have to work on a plan to reach that percentage, which means that even if 2030 means 4 years down the line, but still it might be a little bit short because you will need to do a lot of actions and keep on complying with the regulation to reach that goal. This is a live example of one of our customers, which is Do. Do is one of the main telecom operators in the UAE. So they wanted to embed the ESG into their supplier evaluation to reduce risk, ensure compliance, and strengthen their long-term sustainability. So by having synergy, they were able to comprehensively do the ESG evaluation for their suppliers. They can ongoingly monitor the analytics of their performance and identify the risk, and it's considered as a mitigation tool to have their support for the ethical sourcing of procurement, and increase their transparency, and even they use some data to enhance their corporate sustainability reports. Just to give you an example, you don't need to start with the whole supply chain that you have, as mentioned by Marina and Asley. You have to identify your where the risk lies more. So you can start with the core suppliers, your strategic partners, the ones that you have high volume of transaction or a high spend. Those are the main ones that you will need to start with immediately. And then on a later stage, the core operational supplier, where they are important suppliers, but replaceable. But still, by having the identification of the suppliers, you will be able to have a proper plan for the assessment and risk mitigation. And then at the latest stage, it will come the secondary suppliers. Just as a final step, so what we do recommend, so first thing, definitely we recommend you to start with your own assessment. You will need to understand where exactly you are standing. So you can do this through definitely a third party who can help you understand this better, understand your gaps, and through other parties who will help you how to cover or come to cover those gaps. So again, you still have the luxury of starting now, because some companies are not yet mandating a certain score for doing business. So that means you don't need to fear of having that assessment. So this is one of the challenges that we have been facing in our region, that some customers doesn't want to take their assessment because they feel that they will not score a good score, which will interrupt the business. But it's like you are afraid to take a medical test that it will show that you are not healthy. This is something that you will need to do now. This is something that you will need to work on, because you will need to be competitive, and later stages, the companies will identify the business based on ESG score, as mentioned. Second step, of course, that you will have to extend this assessment to your supply chain, because as mentioned, there where lies most of the emissions and most of the risk. So you will need to have a better visibility and or better monitoring over your supply chain. And then based on those assessments, you will be able to identify the gaps, where the improvement points or areas that you have to work on. And then you will embed this into your process and systems for a better process and more ESG and sustainability friendly. And the fifth point, this is a continuous journey, as mentioned. It's not like a tick box that you will do once. It's a long life journey. Thank you. So please, if you have any questions, please share them in the Q&A section, and we'll be happy to respond to it. So we have one question here from practitioner perspective. Sustainability rating tend to improve only when emission reduction efforts are backed by tangible improvement. How do we address this reality, especially in for the medium, micro, medium and small enterprises? So Asli, Marina, you would like to comment on that question?
Do you want to take it, Marina, or should I?
Sorry, I had some problems with audio. I couldn't hear it.
Okay, so I'll repeat the question. It is from a practitioner perspective, sustainability rating tend to improve only when emission reduction efforts are backed by tangible investment. How do we address this reality, especially for MSMEs?
Yeah, I would like to leave it to you because I know you have a lot of activities in CNSG, and then I can talk about the consultancy perspective.
Okay, can you please repeat, Michael?
From a practitioner perspective, sustainability rating tend to improve only when emission reduction efforts are backed by tangible investment. How do we address this reality, especially for MSMEs?
So yes, this is true. And in our synergy questionnaire, we ask the companies if they're calculating scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions, if they are doing any investments regarding this topic, and also what the companies get when they complete our questionnaire. They get an action plan. For example, if they don't have a very good score or rating, there are also suggested some corrective actions that they can take. For example, it may be regarding energy efficiency, it may be regarding doing any ESG certification, it may be regarding beginning to calculate your GHG emissions, and so on. So basically what we do, we try to give some direction to the companies on what they can do in order to improve it. And in Synergy, we give the possibility for companies to calculate their emissions. So they can choose, for example, if they want to calculate it by themselves, or if they don't have such tool, they can do it on our platform, for example.
Thank you,
if
Marina.
I can bring also the consultancy perspective, like it is all about prioritization, right? Like, because when it comes to investing in supplier ESG capability development, like if we want to bring our performance from 0 to 10 in one day, of course, it is going to require a lot of tangible investments, and it is not maybe possible for micro, small, and medium enterprises. But supplier prioritization and looking at the red flags and looking at what kind of let's say, like, pass me the term, like low-hanging fruits, like easy wins that we can target at the beginning, then we can create programs like trainings for suppliers that we're seeing many global companies that are introducing trainings for their suppliers and tackling during these trainings that are that could be done also through the learning management system, so it is scalable and it doesn't require a lot of investment. Then they can tackle actually the main like priority risks. If there's a human rights risk that is at the forefront, that is the biggest red flag in the supply chain, then like this could be the first step that they can take. So the short answer is prioritization and an action plan. An action plan will show the like priority levels and also the investments that each action will take. Then the company can look at their reality, like what kind of budget and funding they can afford. Then they can introduce the training and the level of corrective action plans that is needed. But of course, an investment is going to be required, but with the right prioritization and understanding the scope of the corrective action plan and the supplier that the correction action plan is going to go is a crucial point that allows us to direct the investment at the right point.
I would like also to add to Azli and Marina that you are talking about it from only the environment perspective. However, there is also the social and governance perspective that also affect the scoring of your company. So if you apply, for example, the male to female ratios in your company code of conduct, there is a lot of things that it can happen without a heavy investment in that space. So there is a lot of areas that you can tackle that would not require heavy investment, but it will require prioritizing the right moves. Okay, since there is no more questions, thank you everyone. Thank you for joining. Thank you, Azli. Thank you, Marina.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thank you.